Welcome to the One Pager with Dave Carver, where we take complicated topics and reduce them to what actually matters. No shouting, no politics, just clarity. The Monroe Doctrine, a warning, a line, or a lie we told ourselves. Let's talk about something most of us learned in school. We nodded our heads at it, we passed the test, and then never really revisited. The Monroe Doctrine. Sounds official, sounds clean, sounds like something carved into stone tablets and stored safely in American history. But like most doctrines, policies, and declarations, it wasn't just a statement. It was a choice. And choices always carry consequences. This is the One Pager. I'm Dave Carver. Let's break this down. What was the Monroe Doctrine? Well, in 1823, President James Monroe stood before Congress and laid out what would become one of the most influential foreign policy statements in American history. In simple terms, the Monroe Doctrine said this: Europe, don't mess with the Western Hemisphere. No new colonies, no interference, no funny business. In return, the United States promised it wouldn't interfere in European affairs. At face value, it sounds reasonable, even noble. A young nation standing up and saying this hemisphere is off limits. But context matters. So what was the world like in 1823? Well, America was still young. There was no massive military, no global reach, no aircraft carriers floating around the world. Spain was losing control of its colonies. Latin America was erupting in revolutions. European powers were watching closely, calculating how to reclaim influence. And the United States? We were young. We were nervous. The Monroe Doctrine wasn't backed by force. It was backed by hope, British naval power, and a belief that saying something confidently might make it true. That's an important detail, because from the very beginning, the Monroe Doctrine was less about strength and more about intent. The intent versus reality. The intent was protection. The reality became permission. Originally, the doctrine was meant to protect newly independent nations in the Americas from European recolonization. But over time it evolved, or more accurately, it was reinterpreted. And here's where things get interesting. From shield to sword. Fast forward into the early 1900s, enter Theodore Roosevelt. Roosevelt didn't just affirm the Monroe Doctrine, he expanded it with what became known as the Roosevelt Corollary. The message shifted from Europe, stay out, to Europe, stay out, and if someone in the Western Hemisphere causes trouble, we'll handle it. That subtle shift changed everything. Now the United States wasn't just a protector. It became the enforcer. This justification was used to intervene in Cuba, Panama, Nicaragua, Haiti, and the Dominican Republic. Sometimes to stabilize, sometimes to control, sometimes to protect American business interests. The line between help and domination got blurry pretty fast. And as we all know, power has a way of expanding. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The Monroe Doctrine worked, but not always in the way it was sold. It helped keep European powers largely out of the Americas. But it also laid the groundwork for an American interventionism. When you declare a sphere of influence, you don't just gain responsibility. You gain temptation and power. Unchecked power always drifts. Was it imperialism? Some historians say yes, others say it was necessary. Both can be true at the same time. The Monroe Doctrine wasn't evil, but it wasn't innocent either. It reflects something deeply human. We often justify our actions by the outcome we want, not the methods we use. And that's where the doctrine becomes dangerous. Why this still matters? Well, you might be thinking, Dave, This is 200 years old. Why does it matter? Well, it's because the Monroe Doctrine never really went away. It shows up whenever America talks about national interests, regional stability, defending democracy. Sometimes those phrases are true. Sometimes they're just convenient. The doctrine taught us something subtle, but very lasting. If we say something loud enough and long enough, it becomes policy, even if no one voted on it, even if the world has changed. But the bigger question is, when does protection turn into control? And who decides? Every doctrine begins with fear. Every doctrine ends with power. The difference is whether we're honest about that transition. The Monroe Doctrine reminds us that ideas outlive the people who create them. What starts as a defense can become dominance. What starts as principle can become precedent. And if we're not careful, we will inherit beliefs that we never even examined. Here's the takeaway. History isn't just something that happened. It's something that's still happening through us. The Monroe Doctrine wasn't just a line in a textbook. It was a decision. And every generation has to decide whether to repeat it, revise it, or reject it. Because the most dangerous doctrines aren't the ones written down. They're the ones we follow without thinking. I'm Dave Carver. That's the one-pager. Think clearly, choose wisely, and don't outsource your discernment. We'll talk again soon.